Solitary confinement at the Indianapolis Training Center was called the prayer room. And you heard about it a little bit on the Shiny Happy People documentary. If someone breaks the rules in prison, a lot of times they'll be put in solitary confinement for 24 to 48 hours. I was in there for a full week.
Whoa.
Not being able to talk to anyone, not knowing what's going on, not having any communication with the outside world, not knowing how long you're even going to be in there because they don't tell you. There was a Bible and that was it. But after the first 24 hours, that's when I think a little bit of the psychosis starts to set in. Once they let me out, I actually had a one-on-one conversation with Bill Gothard in his office.
Oh.
I did not reveal any of the details to Bill Gothard. I didn't want her getting in trouble, but also just because I'd just gotten out of this solitary confinement situation. I did not want to go back into that. He was interrogating me and, just asking me about my own sin, my own lust. At the end of the conversation, his conclusion was that I should go off into this more intensive isolation program.
Hey guys, my name is Shelise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you want to see our faces, go to my YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness, or you can like and subscribe. Guys, it means the world when you hit that subscribe button. Tells the algorithm that you want to shoot this out to more people and help me advocate for these survivors of these cults, people who are brave enough to tell their stories. So thank you for that. Today's guest, he reached out. I guess some of his fans reached out to him and they were like, you need to call Shelise, because they saw that I was doing the episodes on the IBLP and they were like, he's got a story to tell. And I'm so happy that they did and that he reached out. We are going to be talking about what happens from a male's perspective when you grow up in the Institute in Basic Life Principles run by Bill Gothard. We'll get into what all of that means in a second. And then once you get out of the cult and overcorrect into addiction, and then when you can actually come back to the center and figure out what works for you. So thank you so much for joining us, Davey Jackson.
Hey, everyone is going to be so excited about this collab. I'm telling you.
Amazing.
This is what they want to see.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about how you have your own YouTube channel, Davey Jackson. Everyone go check it out. We'll put all the links in the description, so don't worry. But I was looking at your videos on Shiny Happy People, and you also interview other people.
That's right.
And and for those who are wondering, Shiny Happy People is the new documentary that just came out on Amazon Prime. It's like their top show right now. Everyone is getting into it. And so I was over on your channel trying to get some more deets about your life, and I didn't find much. And I was like, I think we need to dive more into your story. So is this a Cults to Consciousness exclusive on Davey Jackson?
It is. Yeah. I've never really talked in depth about, what it was like growing up in a cult, what it was like being a homeschooler all the way through high school. So yeah, this is very much an exclusive and I'm excited.
Yes, this is fun. And you're also a comedian and you do throw in stuff about like, I was raised in a cult. So I think that's also really fun. And I think your audience is probably going to be really excited to hear more about the details of your life.
Oh yeah, they always want to peek behind the scenes, and so this is going to be really fun, really, really fun.
I love it. So before we get started, for those who aren't familiar with the IBLP, can you just give a brief overview of what it is, so we're kind of on the same page when we get into your experience?
Yeah, so IBLP, it's an interesting cult because it's not like how people typically understand a cult, right? This was an international organization. They didn't have any headquarters necessarily where everyone stayed. It wasn't out on, some ranch or compound.
Commune,
yeah. It was more so just this educational program. That's kind of how they positioned it, right? Started in the 60s or 70s. And this guy, Bill Gothard, would go around giving these seminars on how to raise godly families, essentially. And he parlayed that into, like I said, an educational organization that was providing, materials primarily to homeschool families and just getting a lot of people hooked into his teachings. They did have training centers all over the world, but like I said, it wasn't it wasn't a church. It wasn't structured the same way as, maybe like a religion that you would see and identify as a cult. They didn't really mess with the churches so much. They just wanted to have their programs, their seminars, their conferences, and it was this giant brainwashing and indoctrination style program.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that really stands out, and probably why so many people are just jumping on board to hear about this cult is because it infiltrated so many different churches and religions that you couldn't just single it down to one thing, like Mormonism, for example, or the FLDS. It was so widespread that it permeated every part of the states and beyond, right? Because it's worldwide. And that's why it's so shocking when you really get into the details about what Bill Gothard was promoting and why it's really scary. So what are some of the rules and the lifestyle things that you have to follow if you're in the IBLP?
Yeah, so they draw primarily from fundamental Christianity, right? As conservative as you can get. So women wear dresses. You're not allowed to listen to rock music or even Christian rock music. It's all, gospel music, hymns. You can't date. You're supposed to save your first kiss for marriage. It's just this very rigid, structured, extremely, I would say, hardline Christian lifestyle.
And it's very patriarchal. So the women essentially belong to the men or belong to their father, and they have to obey at all costs. Submit is one of the big words, right? Submit. And also one of the things that everyone is so upset about, obviously, is the perpetuation of abuse, because you have this teaching where if a woman is assaulted or hurt in any way, it's her fault. She must have done something to draw it in. Maybe she had a V-line shirt, or maybe she was showing her shoulders, or maybe, tell me if this is right, I don't think this shirt would be allowed because the print draws attention to my chest, right?
Oh yeah, no, that your shoulders are exposed. You can kind of see your collarbone.
Control.
That's all very problematic. Yeah, you're creating a stumbling block for me. But you're exactly right. The umbrella of authority was what Gothard preached, right? So there's this umbrella, and everyone has to stay under this umbrella of authority. And if you drift out from under that umbrella, whether you're a child or you're a wife or whatever, you're exposed to the influence of the devil at that point, right? So you got to stay under that umbrella. And what one of my listeners pointed out was, well, what if the devil's already under the umbrella? What happens then?
Right. Within the home.
If you're supposed to absolutely submit to your authority, and your authority is evil, well, you have nowhere to go at that point.
Yeah, we did a heartbreaking interview with Emily, who was on the documentary, and she just had the same issue with her dad being assaulted at home and just trying to get out of the house. I mean, there's so many instances of that happening, and I think she was the one on the documentary, or someone said it, that IBLP turns every father into a cult leader. And that's kind of what happens, is you become isolated within your family unit, isolated from the world around you. You have no idea what normal, quote, normal is, because you're so isolated and you're only interacting with people who are from this. And also a big thing is the homeschooling. So Advanced Training Institute, where they don't want you anywhere near public school. And if you are in ATI homeschooling, you just get these wisdom booklets that are basically school as if the Bible wrote it.
That's right.
So it's not really a secular education. So let's get into your childhood, because I feel like we covered it pretty well, right? Unless, is there something else you want to add about it in general?
No, I think the only thing is, we saw, all of this play out in graphic detail with the Duggars, right?
Right.
I mean, how poisonous this environment can be, especially for women, where you've got a predator inside the home and your authority just covers it up and sweeps it under the rug and makes excuses. And there's never any justice at the end of the day. Yeah.
And I always forget that the Shiny Happy People documentary was basically focusing on the Duggars, but I always just skip right to the source of the issue, which is IBLP. But yes, the documentary is centered around exposing the Duggars' family secrets. And you may have seen them on TLC, 20 Kids and Counting. They had a show for a really long time. So yeah, in that case, one of the oldest sons, or was he the oldest son?
Yeah, Josh Duggar.
Who was assaulting his sisters, and other kids, and it's really problematic. And I think the thing that boils my blood the most is when religious institutions use forgiveness as a means of persecution, I guess is the right word, where there's really no justice. They just say, oh, don't worry, he's repented of it and God forgave him. No. That's not how it should work.
Well, even taking it a step further than that, where, okay, you've been through this traumatic experience, right? But that's just God putting you through trials and tribulations to test and enhance your faith.
Yeah.
Or even worse, well, it was all happening, but you never cried out. And so really it's your fault,
right,
for not identifying this abuse and bringing it to our attention. Not that we were going to do anything about it anyway, but you could have at least spoken up.
Yeah. And that's something I totally forgot about, that part of the documentary where it's the law of crying out, right? So if someone were assaulting me and I didn't scream out to them to stop, then I deserved it and that's my fault. And that's so wrong and problematic because not everyone has the ability to fight back. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Like there's so many different trauma responses that can occur when you're under distress. And so it's so wrong in so many ways. So I'm excited to get your perspective because you're the first guy that we've talked to. So far, we've only talked to women. And so I would love to hear what happened when you were a child. And I think we wanted to start when you were about 12 years old. So do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I had a relatively normal childhood, like a very happy childhood. I was homeschooled all the way through high school. But my parents were very serious about academics. I got a great education being homeschooled, and I'm incredibly grateful for that experience. And like I said, we were pretty normal. I mean, my mom didn't wear dresses all the time; she wore pants. My dad came from a background where he loved rock and roll music. My parents dated, so we didn't come from this super hardline fundamental Christian background. Right. But my parents attended a basic seminar when I was about 12 years old. And that's when everything changed for us. Bill Gothard was saying all the things that a parent wants to hear: how to protect your kids, how to make sure that, you're doing what you need to do as a parent to make sure that they have a happy, healthy, successful life. And so it was easy to draw parents in who were already religious, and they just wanted the best for their kids. And that was my parents' experience. They just wanted the best for me and my siblings. And so, they went to this basic seminar, heard what they wanted to hear. And we were already homeschooling. And so they just kind of transitioned into, okay, we'll continue homeschooling. We'll also incorporate these aspects of the IBLP training, right? Yeah. So they started using the wisdom booklets. But for my family, the wisdom booklets were just supplementary.
Oh, good.
It wasn't the only thing that we were doing. Yeah, I got a phenomenal education. When I came out of high school, I was like at a college level, not because of the wisdom booklets, and that's what the wisdom booklets claim to do, right? Yeah, just so we're on the same page. But yeah, I mean, my parents, they weren't your typical IBLP parents, right? Like there were some IBLPers that would eat, sleep, and breathe the cult.
Yeah.
Right. That's all they lived for. They would go to conferences and seminars, send their kids to these programs. My parents really weren't like that. We went to one annual conference. So the cult has an annual conference every year in Knoxville, Tennessee, on the University of Tennessee campus. And they fill up this stadium on the campus. They have programs for kids. They have speakers from morning to evening. They've got this giant choir that sings. It's a pretty big deal. And I think around 40 to 50,000 people, in during the height of the cult would attend this conference every year. So it was a really big deal. But it's the only conference my family ever went to. And I think when my parents, kind of saw how robotic everyone really was as far as following the rules of the cult, at that point they were kind of like, all right, well, we agree with a lot of the teachings of the cult and we want to continue, doing the wisdom booklets and following these rules, but we don't want to be as heavily involved as some other families, right? So my mom and my sister still wore dresses all the time, never wore pants. Rock and roll music was, not allowed at all in my house growing up. We weren't allowed to watch TVs or movies. But the dating aspect for my family is really what kind of started the experience that I had with the trauma that I experienced in IBLP. It was the dating rules, because in this cult you weren't supposed to date, right? Courtship was the accepted dating philosophy, and really courtship is just a watered down version of arranged marriage within IBLP, right? So the scenario is you only court someone if you are already intending to marry them.
Oh.
Yeah. So as a man, I would have to approach this as, I go and ask the father permission to court his daughter with the intention of marrying her. But my family also has to approve of this match. This isn't just a decision that I make independently, right? And then once you're courting, it's very much a family affair. It's a merging of the two families. So you're not allowed to go on, one-on-one dates with the girl that you're courting. There has to be a chaperone, and a lot of times it would be both families would be involved in those dates, right? It was basically just this, like I said, this big family affair.
That's awkward.
And that's what you were supposed to do. It's so awkward. And how are you supposed to get to know someone that way? You can't have private conversations. You can't touch the other person. You're not even really supposed to hug. I know, like when Josh Duggar dated Anna Duggar, like they showed clips of them holding hands and kind of caressing one another. That to me, the way that I understood courtship, that shouldn't even be happening. Right? Like it should be this very sterile environment right up until the point of your wedding.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of figure it all out on your wedding night.
Oh boy.
Supposedly. Yeah. So that was the accepted dating ideology for IBLP. But when I hit about 16 and the hormones start kicking in and I'm seeing, girls around me, I kind of decided that's not really for me. I don't want to do that. I want to have a normal dating experience. And so I started dating a girl that went to the same church as my family did, but in secret. I didn't tell my family about it. I didn't tell anyone about it. It was I even had to explain to her, like, we can't tell anyone about this. Like, we are in a relationship, but we cannot tell anyone that we're dating because I'll get in trouble.
So her family was not an IBLP.
No.
Okay.
No,
so
not
she
at all.
was
She
kind of
was the
like,
head
what are you talking
cheerleader at her
about?
high school.
Oh, yeah, she was, Davey.
Yeah, I was the weirdest, most awkward 16-year-old, and somehow I really think it was just she saw my trauma and was like, "That I'm gonna fix him,"
Oh no.
But yeah, she was a totally normal girl, normal 16-year-old. I was 16, she was 16, and it was a very innocent relationship too. We weren't doing anything crazy. And the bulk of the interaction that we had was either at church or on the phone, because I couldn't take her out on dates.
Right.
I wasn't allowed to get my driver's license when I was 16. I wasn't allowed to go out on my own when I was 16. I was still very much isolated and sheltered.
Real quick, is the driving thing a rule of IBLP that you can't get a car?
No, I think that was just a fun rule within my family specifically. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I just had to clarify because that was the first time I had heard of it, so I just wanted to check.
And honestly, I don't think that driving rule was even like a repression tactic. I think that was more so, if you get your license at 16, our car insurance is going to be absolutely through the roof. So you have to wait till you're 18, and then we can talk about you wrecking your first car. So I mean, we just had this very innocent relationship, but when my parents found out what was going on, I mean, they were absolutely horrified. They were horrified because this is their first experience with one of their children rebelling against the rules, throwing out everything that I had been taught, and doing my own thing, making my own decisions, being an independent 16-year-old. They were absolutely horrified. Did
you have siblings?
I did, yeah, but I'm the oldest, so I was the guinea pig.
So so that's an extra hit, right? When the oldest one falls away and they're like, "Oh no, I thought we were doing everything right. What happened? You know what happened?
It was all going so well.
Hormones. You know what happened? Being a teenager. Nothing happened.
Just doing normal teenage stuff. Yeah, that was the interesting part about it, is like looking back, and even my mom looking back, She's just like, you were just being a normal kid. But everything that they had been taught, all this indoctrination from the cult,
yeah, you can't blame them,
kicked in immediately. No, of course not.
I remember it was the same thing for us in Mormonism, except you can date like regular dates, but you can't date until you're 16, and you can't. It's like kind of a soft rule that you're not supposed to kiss until you're 16. So better than marriage, right? You still have to wait to have sex until marriage. You're not supposed to like long kiss. Anyways, we don't need to get into those rules. But I remember my first kiss. I think I may have talked about it once or twice before on the podcast, but I had my first kiss when I was like 14, and it was just a tiny little peck. And it was the best and worst experience of my life. The best because I had this huge crush on him, and I was immediately on cloud nine. And of course, I'm not really interacting with boys other than at school or at the football games, which is where he was. It's the only reason we all went to the football games and sports and stuff, because we just wanted to interact with other people, other sexes. Yeah. And because this is in Utah. And so right after he kisses me, his friends revealed that it was a dare, like how many girls he could kiss in an hour.
Oh, no.
And I was like, I was so upset because not only did I just break the rules of Mormonism blatantly, and I felt so guilty for it afterwards, but he didn't even care. Like, he didn't even want to be with me. And I was so sad. And I remember feeling so guilty about telling my mom, who's my best friend. If you guys have watched the show, I'm like super close with my mom. And she was really cool. Same as your parents. We were Mormon, but she was kind of the cooler Mormon. So I wasn't really, really in a strict household like other kids. But I remember being so guilty that we were driving home one day, and she was like, Shelise, I'm just so proud of you. I'm just so proud of the young woman that you've become. You are just so righteous, and and she's like meaning it. And I'm over here like, oh my gosh, she knows. Oh my gosh, she knows. Oh my gosh, she knows. And she was like, I was just talking to this other mom the other day, and her daughter's really having a hard time with boys. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she knows. Oh my gosh, she knows. Like having a panic attack. And then I think finally I told her, my brother told her, because I ended up telling my brother, and she was so sad that I didn't tell her about my first kiss. But now she's like, well, yeah, I get it, because you were terrified because it was a rule, but she didn't care. All I'm saying is I get it, and I can understand the shame of something that's so natural and should not be it should not be shamed.
It really shouldn't. I think absolutely the self-judgment. I feel like that's something that cults rely on, right?
Yeah.
Is for you to just be harder on yourself than anyone else could. In IBLP, I would say there's probably some parents that would have been cool with you having your first kiss or something along those lines, but these rules were so heavily ingrained, and it was such a huge deal that you're supposed to save your first kiss for marriage.
Right.
My parents freaked out when they found out. If I had told them on my own, they would have freaked out. When they found out on their own, they freaked out.
Right. I guess it makes sense, though, really fast, because your sin would be like me telling my mom I had sex, because that's like the comparable.
Yes.
You have to wait to have sex for marriage, and with you, it's the first kiss. So absolutely, like the punishment, I get it. That totally makes sense.
Yeah, it was a pretty major scandal in my family. The fact that I had this secret girlfriend. And my mom found out because she caught me on the phone with my girlfriend. And so it was a nightmare. My parents decided at that point, in order to save our child, who is clearly rejecting all of these teachings that are going to make him a happy, successful person, as he becomes an adult, they decided to move the entire family from Texas, where we were living at the time, up to Massachusetts.
Oh my gosh, they did an entire move just because of that? Wow.
Yeah. It was to get away from these evil influences that I was clearly experiencing.
Okay.
So we move, we go through this move, but again, my parents still didn't really know what to do with me, because once they take me away from basically my high school sweetheart, right? My world is over. At this, I dropped into this horrendous depression. No. I thought that this was the girl that I was going to marry.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's what had been ingrained in me, even though I'm only 16 years old.
Right.
I'm dating her with the intent that someday we will get married.
Right.
And so I'm just, having a really hard time with this. In my parents' defense, once again, they were only trying to do what they thought was right.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pushing back hard and making their lives miserable in the process. And I think an act of desperation, they decided the only thing that we can think of to do is send him off somewhere else, so that hopefully he can get better. He can come back to the path that we know is going to be best for him.
Okay, and then that was the slow descent into the hell, which was the training center.
That's when they sent me to the Indianapolis Training Center. Yeah.
All right. So what happens? I know that you're pissed off, right? Any teenager would be. Not only are you moved away from any and all friends and your girlfriend, but now you're being sent away somewhere completely different to a center for, quote, bad kids. And so I'm sure you're just fuming, and teenagers are already very angsty. So there's probably a lot going on there. What are you thinking when you pull up to the center? What's going through your mind? Paint us a picture of what it looks like and what's happening.
So just like you said, I was already just distraught. I was angry. I was sad. I was so emo. We get to my parents actually drove me out to this compound out in Indianapolis, right? And as we get there, I don't know what to think. I know that I'm going to a program that hopefully will get me back on the right path, that will correct all of the bad decisions that I've been making, especially with having a girlfriend, but also just my rebellion, my pride, my arrogance, right? That this program is designed to fix that. And it was basically a behavioral rehabilitation program that the cult ran out of the Indianapolis compound called Life Focus. That was the name of the program. And it was basically just a place for parents to send their bad kids for correction. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know a whole lot about the Life Focus program. So I was just angry and confused, and also a little bit curious. Like, what is this going to be? What are they sending me to?
Yeah.
But I get there and immediately I knew, oh, this is going to be rough. Because this Life Focus program was run by the cult's paramilitary soldiers, if you will, the alert guys. So these are guys that have been through this intense training, physical training, indoctrination, and now they're running this program for wayward youths, and they were hardcore. These alert guys were hardcore, and they were there to break us, to break us down so that they could fill our heads with the teachings of the cult. Yeah, and get us back on the right track.
So this was an all boys situation.
So the program that I was in, yes, was an all boys situation, but there were other programs at the Indianapolis Training Center that were specifically for girls as well. I don't remember the name of the program that the girls did, but they had almost a parallel training program for them, basically for the rebellious girls. So there was the rebellious boys that were going through their program, and then the rebellious girls that were going through their program in Indianapolis.
Okay. So when you say rebellious boys, give us an idea of the actual fabric of the people that were there. Like, are they actually bad kids? Yeah. Are they just like you and they just got caught with a girlfriend? Kind of, who are these people who are around you? Do you feel like you fit in?
The type of person that was part of this Life Focus program was just across the spectrum, which was one of the craziest aspects of Life Focus. So you've got guys like me who have, definitely maybe rebelled, like getting a girlfriend. That was capital offense within the cult, right? But then you've got other guys in there who have never done anything wrong, and their parents are just sending them to this program, hoping that, they'll learn more. They'll become better people. Cause that's essentially what the cult pitched this program as, was if you really want your kids to get the full experience of spiritual training, and godly indoctrination, this is where you can send your boys, right? So you had guys like me that were probably a little bit rebellious. You had other guys that, were all in on the cult. Like they agreed with all the teachings. They wanted to be, good little Gothardites, right? And then you had some other guys that were actual criminals, that were part of this program. So, IBLP had partnered with the local Indianapolis government, I guess, to essentially try to rehabilitate some of their actual juvenile delinquents.
Wow.
So I'm in there with guys that have committed, armed robbery, grand larceny, breaking and entering. I mean, these were kids that had really come from rough backgrounds.
Right.
And so you've got a definite culture shock that we were immediately exposed to coming into this program.
How did you interact with these people? Because I'm sure that you had roommates. Did you have any sort of negative interactions with other people that you were with? Did you find it to be a little cliquey? Like, how did that work?
Yeah. So they would put us 4 to a room in this program. So we had bunk beds in these small little hotel type rooms where you had 2 bunk beds, a bathroom, a dresser, and that was it.
Whoa.
So we definitely kind of separated out into our own little cliques for sure. And it was typically the more rebellious guys like me that would band together. And then you had the goody guys that kind of kept to themselves and didn't really want to be associated with the guys like me because we were rebellious and we were sinful and, they were just trying to do the right thing. One of the things about this training center is it's just Indianapolis in particular is kind of a melting pot for all different kinds of people. We know that a lot of times the folks that were having issues at some of the other training centers, they would get sent to the Indianapolis training center as almost like a punishment.
Oh.
Right. I think that's a fairly common theme. So like if you'd been working at headquarters, which was like the ultimate dream for an IBLP kid is to go work at headquarters with Bill Gothard. Mm-hmm. If you messed up there, you got caught talking to a member of the opposite sex, or you were breaking the rules, or whatever the case may be, or maybe you just fell out of favor, you would get sent down to Indianapolis. And that was kind of, what is it in that movie? The Land for Lost Toys.
Oh, yeah.
The Land for Broken Toys, or the Island for Broken Toys. Yeah. Whatever it was. And so it was, it was an interesting place to experience one of the training centers for the first time. Because like I said, my family never really went to any of the training centers. The only big event that we did was the Knoxville conference. So this was kind of my first exposure to the IBLP training center was there in Indianapolis.
Yeah. I want to get into your head a little bit because you mentioned, and I wanted to bring this up, that you were ready to be rehabilitated. And so at this point, because this is your first exposure and it's probably very shocking, do you find yourself doubling down on your faith and really wanting to get better? Or is this where you start to see like, this is a little crazy and I don't know if I want to be a part of this anymore?
It's absolutely the second aspect, right? As soon as I got to Indianapolis, immediately it's the brainwashing starts, right? The interrogation happens, the hard labor happens. I don't necessarily want to say that they use sleep deprivation or starvation tactics, but if you were not following the rules to a T at the Indianapolis Training Center, they could wake you up super early in the morning and make you go out and run laps, or go out and pick up trash, do community service, that sort of thing. And so as soon as I start seeing that their intentions are not good here, right? Like their goal was to break us, and they were going to do whatever they needed to make that happen. And I was already torn up and sad about my girlfriend being taken away from her, and I just wanted to get back to her. And so for me, it was just like, make it through this, but this is not for me.
Yeah.
This cult is not for me at all. I think there were definitely guys in the program that kind of doubled down on their faith, like you said. But those were the ones that were already following the rules, that didn't even need to be there. But guys like me, it was kind of reinforcement for us that we don't want to be a part of this.
Yeah. I find it interesting that they're trying to break the young men, because breaking down the women seems like a natural progression for getting them to submit to their husband, submit to your father, submit to your husband. But what do you think the purpose was to break down the young men? Who were they trying to get them to submit to? Or were they?
They just wanted us to submit to the cult rules and the cult authority, right?
Got it.
They wanted us, and so because we were still children, even at 16 years old, they wanted us to be under that umbrella of authority. And in order to do that, you've got to make sure that they are absolutely unquestioningly following those rules. And that way, as you get older and you become an adult, you can go out and influence the world for Christ.
Right.
Because that was the whole goal all along, was let's get everyone, as many people as we can, to subscribe to our version, or really Gothard's version of Christianity. And so I think that's why they wanted to break us down. And if you can't break these kids down, this is the whole issue to me. If you can't break these kids down and get them to follow the rules, then Gothard's teachings are false. Because now they're out from under that umbrella of authority, and all the things that he told you to do as a parent that you didn't work.
Right.
And so it ruins his credibility.
Right. Did you notice any other guys in that same program who were also not willing to be broken?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So there was there was definitely a group of us that we were not going to follow the rules. We were going to do our own thing. It didn't matter what they did to us. Didn't matter how much, they sleep deprived us, or only let us eat one meal a day, or interrogated us, or gave us hard labor, whatever it was. We were not going to follow the rules. And there was probably about like 5 or 6 of us in this program. And there were I want to say there were like 30 to 40 boys in the Life Focus program that I was a part of. So there were like 5 or 6 of us that were just like, we're going to make this as difficult for them as possible.
Oh, right.
And I'm not proud of this part, but we would kind of give the goody two shoes guys in the program, we would give them such a hard time.
Oh no.
We'd sneak into their room at night and throw them in the shower and pour Kool-Aid on them. Oh. If we caught them basically snitching on us. So it really became like this kind of prison system that we were a part of.
Jeez, I guess.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. There was, and I do have some good memories, some of the relationships that I made during that program, but in the end, it was extremely traumatizing for a lot of people, myself included. Yeah.
I have so many questions. One of them is, were you ever worried at all that your parents would find out about your bad behavior at the center and punish you when you got home?
Oh, they told my parents about it. I wasn't worried at all. I was already in trouble. So I was like, what more could you possibly do to me at this point? You can't send me off to a worse training center, or so I thought. They actually could have sent me off to a worse training center. They had a log cabin program that was complete isolation, and you go out there for weeks on end with one mentor, and that's your life until you decide to follow the rules. Yeah. So they could have, but yeah, they were telling my parents everything. I actually, the girl that I had been dating, that my parents moved me away from, she figured out where I was, and she was sending me letters while I was at this training center. Yeah. She was sending letters, but they were intercepting the letters, opening them, and then sending those letters to my parents.
I was going to say, you probably never saw those.
Never did. I thought she completely forgot about me. I thought she abandoned me. Yeah.
It's like a notebook situation.
It really was. Yeah. They were hoarding all those letters.
Every single day. Why didn't you write back? I sent you a letter.
If you're a bird, I'm a bird. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. I really want to get into specifics, if you're willing to talk about it, as far as what was the manual labor? What were the ways that they tried to break you down? And then once we get through that, I want to talk about the punishments if you weren't following the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So this program, it was basically just meant to mentally, physically, and emotionally exhaust you, right? So from the time that we got up, we were working. We went to bed working. We woke up working. They would take us off campus for community service, where we would pick up trash in the slums of Indianapolis. There were properties that the cult owned that we would go and essentially help remodel. There was a big barn. My co-host on my podcast, Bryce, reminded me of this. It was actually an orphanage that they had built on this piece of property that was close to the Indianapolis Training Center that the cult owned, where they would bring in orphans from Russia. I don't know why or what the purpose was, but yeah, so we actually helped build that orphanage. There was a gigantic barn on the property that we essentially helped strip down to the studs and remodel.
Wow. So you're doing actual construction.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were doing the community service. We were doing the construction. There was a house that was completely dilapidated that was owned by an elderly lady that was close to the training center property. And one day we went out there just to completely clean up her house, which was really nice. It was a cool thing to be able to do for this lady who couldn't afford to get the work done herself. So there were aspects of it that I thought were very good. But I later found out that the whole reason they were trying to help her out was to get her to sell her property to the cult ultimately. Yeah. And so we were doing these construction projects, community service projects off campus, but then on campus, we were also doing a lot of maintenance work, cleanup work. We were constantly doing dishes after each meal, because there's thousands of people that live on camp or that lived on campus at the Indianapolis Training Center. And so after every meal, that was one of our responsibilities as well, was dish duty and kitchen cleanup. And so it was work from sunup to sundown. And if you weren't working, you were attending various training seminars where they would, bring you into one of the conference rooms and explain to you how bad you were, how rebellious you were, how problematic you were, and that you needed to follow the rules and submit to authority.
Jeez.
And so when we weren't being worked to death, we were being brainwashed. Another big aspect of this was prayer and Bible memorization. So that was another expectation, was that, we would have prayer sessions and we were supposed to memorize the entire book of James over the course of this program.
Jeez, that's hard.
It was a lot. It was a lot. And the expectations were incredibly high. And so if you messed up even a little bit, they were going to come after you. So you were essentially expected, just do your work, do what we tell you to do, keep your head down, and just absolutely submit at all times.
Yeah.
But not all of us were willing to do that. And there were girls at this training center. And so some of us, myself included, would fraternize with the young ladies that were there. Yeah.
So what did you do?
There were quite a few women that lived on this compound, right, at the Indianapolis Training Center. There were girls that were there for various training programs. Like I said, there was kind of a sister program to the Life Focus program that was specifically for wayward girls. But there were families that lived full time at the training center. And there was one family in particular that had a daughter that I was very attracted to. And at this point, I thought, my girlfriend has abandoned me, and so I'm going to go cry on her shoulder and find comfort in the arms of another woman. And so we started having interactions in secret at the training center. I remember one of the only places that we could meet up to talk for just a few seconds, not even multiple minutes. I mean, it was very brief interactions, was in the stairwells at the training center. And so we would meet in the stairwells of the training center. There was a conference room that at one point there was like a little closet that this conference room had. And we had made plans to go meet in this closet and have like an extended interaction.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And some of the other guys would just, kind of talk to the other girls there as well, but it wasn't quite as extensive as my relationship with this girl that lived at the training center with her family.
Yeah. And that was really risky for her too. I'd like to know from your perspective, because you're watching all of the indoctrination on both sides for men and women. And for women, it seemed considerably worse, at least as far as the interviews that I've conducted so far. Were you noticing how difficult it was for these women as far as the eye traps, like their quote eye traps, this shirt would be an eye trap, or the way that they had to submit, and even being abused and being blamed for it and being told to be thankful for it? Were you noticing this?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you don't really realize how awful it is in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. But I've tried to find this particular woman multiple times.
Really?
After I left the cult. Yeah. I really wanted to see, was she okay? Did she make it out? Because I put her in a relatively dangerous, situation by having this, semi relationship, because the cult really for women is it's awful. It's the things that women go through in this cult. It's monstrous. It's the submission aspect of it, right? And that's kind of the foundation that lets these authority figures absolutely take advantage of the women in the program. It creates an environment of manipulation and exploitation. And you see it over and over and over again. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And the women a lot of times don't even know that they're being exploited and manipulated, because what they've been told is, this is how your life is.
Yeah.
And that's just their reality. And it's absolutely awful. And, you know, talking about this on my podcast, I've gotten emotional multiple times, because looking back, you see the damage that was done to a lot of these women. Fortunately, you know, my family wasn't hardline like that. But my sister, my younger sister, absolutely, you know, went through it to a degree. You know, just having to submit to my parents, which I don't think she really had a problem with. But, you know, as she got older and the rules kind of stayed the same, if she drifted out from those rules, it was a lot worse for her, because she is supposed to be the ultimate model of submission to authority. Women are supposed to be absolutely submissive to the male leadership figures in their lives. And so I just, my heart goes out to the women that are still recovering, you know, from this lifestyle, because I know, you know, some people had it worse than others for sure. But a lot of times this is a lifetime of recovery for them, and disentangling from the indoctrination that they went through.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking. And I've interviewed 3 women so far who were all handpicked by Gothard. It seems like almost every woman involved in this cult has had a negative or kind of icky experience with Bill in some way, shape, or form. And you mentioned the sleep deprivation thing, how that wasn't necessarily a thing for you. The person I just interviewed, her name is Jess. I'm not sure if it's going to come out before or after this interview comes out, but she talked about how when she was put on a no speak order and she would ask for basic needs like food or water, they would make her write 15-page essays on a part of the Bible, and she couldn't sleep until it was done. And if she didn't finish the pages, they would just add more pages to it. And she's like 14 years old. And it's absolutely heartbreaking, the stuff that these women went through. And she also went through the isolation, solitary confinement, and said that it just drove her absolutely insane. And I know that's something that you had experience with. So if you're willing to share, I'd like to get into some of the punishments that you experienced at the training center.
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quick, I had a conversation with a lady who was involved with Bill Gothard very early on. And at 21 years old, Bill Gothard expressed to her, who was 58 or 59 at the time, that he wanted to marry her. And she was one of his staff girls that he completely isolated. You know, she traveled everywhere with him. She wasn't allowed to do anything out from under his purview. And she still struggles with the trauma from that. One of the anecdotes that she shared with me, and I just think this is so telling, right? These women, as they were being abused, had no idea that they were being abused.
Yeah.
That to me is one of the saddest parts about it. As Gothard was, you know, grooming these women, when he would touch them or pet them or whatever the case may be, they didn't even realize that this was abuse. And years later, she shared this with me. She was sitting on the sofa with her now husband, and he started playing footsie with her, and it triggered this trauma response where she just withdrew immediately and was terrified, because that's what she went through with Gothard without even knowing that it was abusive behavior.
Yeah.
It's tragic.
It's definitely a through line with everyone who I interview. They talk about not really understanding that their life was different until they've deconstructed and looked back with a different perspective, and now they can identify the things that were not very great and things that that affected them negatively and still impact them today. And that's one of the major things too that I think people don't understand when you leave a cult is especially people who've never been in it, it's really hard for them to get. First of all, they look at it and they're like, wait, you believed what and you followed what rules? Why didn't you just leave? That's obvious. You should just leave. Number one, when you're raised in it, you have no idea that that's not what, quote, normal life is, because that's your reality. And also, you usually can't just leave because you have no support, no resources, no idea of how to conduct yourself in the outside world. And so, and we're going to talk about that with your story too, but it's just so difficult to unwind the programming when you leave these groups. And that's why I always tell people it is a process. It's not going to happen overnight. Things will come up years later. Aha moments will still happen. I still have aha moments with my guests when they say something, they're like, I'm this way because of the cult. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm this way because of the cult too. Things that just click. Like Daniela from Children of God talking about how she was this insane perfectionist and will do anything to the extreme. And it's so easy for her to do extreme things and she can't do moderation because that's how she was raised. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's me. I never realized, like, I also cannot do moderation. I can do really extreme diets or I'm binging chocolate chip cookies and it's a problem and I'm working on it. But awareness is the first step. And that's why it's so exciting to have all these conversations and do these interviews and start to, it's even therapy for me sometimes. I start to unwind parts about myself. And once you're aware of something, that's when you can really take a hard look at it and start to change and unwind and deprogram from that.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, it was interesting when you mentioned about how this lady wasn't able to speak, right? She was banned from speaking order. Or whatever.
Yeah.
I went through a similar punishment. It was called a talking fast. And you weren't supposed to talk at all because you hadn't followed some particular rule, or maybe you were talking too much, or they caught you talking to a member of the opposite sex, or whatever the case may be. You were put on this talking fast, and it was just kind of indefinite until they told you, okay, you can start talking again. And I'd completely forgotten about that until you mentioned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, her no speak order. That's crazy.
Wow.
That's just one it's another memory I'd locked away.
We tend to do that, right? Just lock away things really for our own sanity, because sometimes it's harder to face it than to just keep all that stuff rattling around in our brain, especially when we're trying to move on with our lives. What were some of the other punishments that they extended to you?
So if you weren't following the rules the way that they wanted you to, right? And I think that's an important distinction to make. You could follow the rules, but if you weren't doing it with the attitude that they thought you should have, it still didn't work, right? You would still get punished for that. If they detected or sensed that you might have some underlying issues, or you were, suppressing, evil thoughts or whatever, you weren't submitting absolutely, that was grounds for punishment as well. So it really was the leadership for the program that I was in. It was very arbitrary on their part how they decided to punish you and when they punished you. And there were a lot of different styles of punishment. You could, have to do extra work. They would put you on, dish duty for extra shifts. But I think for me, the one that was the worst was the isolation, putting you in solitary confinement. And that was the one that I experienced that kind of changed everything for me. They didn't have anything on me in particular where they said, this is the rule you broke, and this is why we're going to put you in solitary confinement. They had suspicions that I was fraternizing with members of the opposite sex at the compound, which they were right about, but they didn't have any hard proof. They just had their inklings and decided to lock me away.
What was that like, the solitary confinement? Was it just an empty room? How long did you have to stay there? Did they feed you? Solitary
confinement at the Indianapolis Training Center was called the prayer room. And you heard about it a little bit on the Shiny Happy People documentary. I feel like a lot of individuals who struggled with the rules in this program have experienced the prayer room. And it's a little bit different at every compound, but specifically at the Indianapolis Training Center, it was a very small hotel room. There was a bed, there was a nightstand, there was a lamp, there was a Bible, and that was it. You had nothing else in the room, except for a bathroom, toilet, and shower, obviously. But you would be locked in this room. You were not allowed to leave. They brought you one meal a day. And the rest of the time you were expected to sit and pray and study the Bible and memorize. And I was put in one of these isolation rooms for a week.
Whoa.
And that experience, you think about the prison systems, and if someone breaks the rules in prison, a lot of times they'll be put in solitary confinement for 24 to 48 hours, right? And that's the punishment.
Mm-hmm.
I was in there for a full week, and that was the most mentally challenging, emotionally challenging thing I've ever been through. I still, have memories of it, just that feeling of complete isolation, not being able to talk to anyone, not knowing what's going on, not having any communication with the outside world, not knowing how long you're even going to be in there, because they don't tell you. You don't know how long you're going to get locked up in here for. You just get locked up. They grab you. You have no warning that it's going to happen. They come and get you from your room or from wherever you're working, and they escort you to this prayer room. And so you go in not really knowing what's going to happen. The first day or so being in a prayer room isn't that overly bad, which is actually kind of nice, not having to work at all, not being interrogated constantly, not being monitored all the time. But after the first 24 hours, when you start questioning, I wonder when they're going to let me out of here. How long have I actually been in here? How many days has it been? That's when I think a little bit of the psychosis starts to set in.
Right.
And then, for me, after I probably was in there, 48 to 72 hours, I was just going crazy, looking for anything to do to occupy my time, because you can only sleep for so long.
Yeah.
And especially at 16 years old, you're full of energy, you're full of hormones. You just want to be able to live your life, and you're locked up in this room. At one point, I think it was probably 3 or 4 days after I'd been in there, I tried to take the window AC unit out and kick out the bars that were on the window, so that I could just escape out. But I realized after I got in the AC unit out that I was too high up to do anything. So I wouldn't have been able to escape. I was in there for a week. I know that some of the other guys that were in that same Life Focus program with me, there was one guy that was in there for a full month.
What?
Yeah, nearly 30 days that he was locked in there. And when that guy came out, he was not okay.
I was gonna say
he was a shell of a person. Really didn't talk a whole lot after he came out of there. It was a very, very traumatizing experience. Jeez. Fortunately, I was only in there for a week. One of my buddies who I'd gotten really close with while I was in this program, they had locked him in for about 2 weeks, and this guy went full MacGyver on the prayer room. It was crazy. So after about 2 weeks in solitary confinement, he essentially devised a plan where he broke through the wall of the prayer room into an adjoining room that wasn't locked, escaped through that room, and ran off campus. They caught him. He was rollerblading in downtown Indianapolis when they caught him trying to get to a bus station, I think. But he had figured out how to bust out of there.
Jeez.
And so that was kind of a legendary escape. There was another, this wasn't in the Life Focus class that I was in. It was a class after mine. And this is absolutely tragic. There was a guy that had been locked up. I'm not sure how long he'd been locked up in the prayer room, but he needed to get out. He'd had enough. He broke through his window, and I don't know how he got through the window, because, the window in the room that I was in, they had bars over it.
Wow.
So even if I'd broken through the window, I wouldn't have been able to get out. But he broke through the window, climbed to the top of the training center. And this is an old hotel, so it's multiple floors, probably 15 or 20 floors. Climbed to the top of the training center with a shard of glass. And his plan was to jump off of the roof. Security caught him. And I think they were worried that he was going to attack them with the glass, but he actually ended up hurting himself with the glass.
Oh.
And so they had to take him to a hospital. because he hurt himself pretty bad while he was up there.
He ended up being okay though?
Yes, as far as I know, he ended up being, physically okay after that experience. Yeah. But this is the kind of stuff that being in this prayer room would do to a person. It just, it triggers this psychosis. And you'll just do anything to get out of there.
I just don't understand how someone can look at this and say, oh yeah, we're helping people. Mm-hmm. Like when you have a group that is this intense, that produces these types of results, how can you think that it's working or that that's okay or that you're actually helping these people? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And let me preface this again by saying I understand that the people running it are also indoctrinated and they also don't really have a full perspective. But it's just, I guess I'm just angry from our perspective now, just looking in and seeing the blatant abuse and the things that are going on and this perpetuation of these ideas that are actively hurting people. It just really angers me that it's allowed to happen and that no one is being called out and no one is being made to take responsibility or accountability for these people who are getting hurt. It's just, I'm just mad, Davey.
It really is infuriating. It's that aspect of it. The prayer room is just a microcosm of what was happening on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Repeatedly, we see instances of abuse that this cult was enabling. It created an environment that promoted exploitation and manipulation, like we talked about. And so whether it was abuse of women, whether it was abuse of men, that is what this cult and its ideology was creating. And people still defend it. People still say, oh, well, that was just Gothard. That wasn't the belief system in place for IBLP. It was because Gothard, was a bad person.
But he created it. He made it up.
And he was drawing all his principles from fundamental Christianity.
Yeah.
Fundamental Baptists believe the exact same thing. A lot of fundamental Mormons have the exact same rules. Mm-hmm. Fundamental Catholics even, so this was not something that he just created out of thin air. It was a continuation of other religious programs that he just put his own twist on. Mm-hmm. So it's not just Gothard, it's the ideologies that were a part of this cult that continue to create an environment for abuse.
Right. And I know we focus a lot on the abuse of women and children because generally those are the people that end up getting hurt the most. I just want to offer, especially because I have you on, sympathy towards the men, because if these men are being broken down just like you were, it would make sense for them to intellectually think that they can perpetuate the same abuse because someone told them that it was okay that they were abused. And then they start to do that to their wife or their child. And they're like, well, that's just how it is. And that's how I was raised. And it just seems to make sense. And so it positions these men to have this power dynamic and it teaches them how to abuse people who are under them.
Absolutely. And I think unless you break out of that mentality, you're destined to repeat history.
Yeah.
All of the abuse and suffering that you experienced, you will most likely inflict on someone else unless you break out of that cycle.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in the lives of a lot of my friends.
Oh, that's
where they've gone on to have unhealthy relationships, inside of a family dynamic with their own wife and kids. And it's just it's tragic to see because it's a continuation of the teachings that, broke them in the first place.
Yeah. And I want to start to talk about your deconstruction process and how you were able to kind of get out of that mindset. But before we move on, is there anything else you want to say about the training center?
Yeah. So probably how I ultimately got out of that training center. It was a very traumatic experience, being in this prayer room and this solitary confinement. And, once I ultimately was allowed out, once they let me out, I actually had a one-on-one conversation with Bill Gothard in his office at the Indianapolis Training Center. And basically the purpose of the conversation was for him to determine, should I even still be a part of this program, or am I too dangerous to the people around me? And they need to send me off to a stricter program, the log cabin program that I mentioned earlier, where you go off into complete isolation with a mentor. So I had this conversation with Bill Gothard, and he was essentially just interrogating me about, what I had been doing while I was, at the Indianapolis Training Center, if I had been defrauding women at the training center, which, I completely, denied everything, because I didn't want to get this young lady in trouble.
Yeah.
That was one of my fears as well, is that if they found out about what she had done, her punishment was going to be 10 times worse than mine.
Yeah.
They would absolutely, if, there was a chance that for someone like her, she could get excommunicated by her family. So I did not reveal any of the details to Bill Gothard, primarily because I didn't want her getting in trouble, but also just because I'd just gotten out of this solitary confinement situation. I did not want to go back into that. So we had this conversation, and he was interrogating me and, just asking me about my own sin, my own lust, my own rebellion, my own pride. And so we had this extended conversation. And at the end of the conversation, his conclusion was that I shouldn't be at this training center anymore, and that I should go off into this more intensive isolation program. But thankfully, my parents at that point had come to the training center, because they told my parents that, hey, there's some stuff going on with your son, and you need to get out here so that we can figure out what to do. They had come to the training center. I guess they were told the option was to send me off this log cabin program, but they decided that was not what I needed, and so they just took me home at that point.
Wow.
I get back home. I'm in a completely new environment after getting out of this Life Focus program, because we had moved from Texas to New England, so I don't have any friends. I don't know anyone, and I basically had to restart my life at that point. And when I got out of the Life Focus program, I knew that I wanted nothing to do with this cult anymore. But I'm still 16 at this point. And family has always been incredibly important to me. And I knew that if I really wanted to leave, if I really wanted to get away from it, I was going to have to emancipate myself. And, in spite of what I'd been through, I still loved my parents very much, still do. I mean, I've got a great relationship with my parents today, but I did not want to put my family through that process. I went and researched, what would be involved in order to emancipate, just because I wanted nothing to do with this program anymore. But, after looking into it and considering all the consequences, I decided that, I would just bide my time until I was 18. And then at that point, I would make a clean break. And that's exactly what I did. Once I turned 18, I told my parents, look, I want nothing to do with IBLP anymore. I still want to be a part of this family. I still love y'all. I just don't want anything to do with Bill Gothard and his teachings anymore.
Yeah.
And they understood that, and they wanted to, maintain the relationship with me. Cause like I said, I'd always had a good relationship with my parents.
Yeah.
Even through some of the difficulty and the trauma, so they understood that. I left the cult at 18, and about a year later, my parents decided, we're seeing way too much negative experience as part of IBLP. It's outweighing the positive experiences, and we need to get away from this too. And so they left the cult about a year later.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Do you feel lucky that they left? Because not a lot of people get to have that with their families.
Yeah, I am so grateful, because I have a lot of friends that their parents never did understand how harmful, Bill Gothard and his teachings truly were. Mm-hmm. And they don't have relationships with their families any longer.
Yeah.
And they are on their own. One of my buddies, we were talking about this exact subject, and, he broke down crying and just told me, I miss my parents. And this is a guy in his 40s that still wishes he could have a relationship with his mom and dad. Ugh. So it's heartbreaking. So I am extraordinarily grateful that my parents understood this is no longer healthy. it wasn't healthy in the first place, and we need to disentangle from IBLP.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And it always breaks my heart when these stupid freaking cults wedge themselves between families when they have no business being there. You know, they brainwash you to the extent where you will put your church or your group or your organization above your own children, and that's just not okay. And I'm so happy that your parents were able to see the harms that it was causing and also leave. I'm wondering if you ever had a conversation with them about wanting to be emancipated, because I can imagine if you were telling them, I want to legally separate from you just to get away from this cult, they would probably be like, oh my gosh, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this.
So I've had a lot of conversations with my parents after the fact, just about what growing up in a cult was like.
Yeah.
It took my mom a long time to even acknowledge that it was a cult. You know, she knew that the teachings were problematic. She knew that Bill Gothard was a monster, but it took her a while to realize, oh yeah, no, this was definitely a cult. This wasn't just a really strict organization. This is your classic cult.
Yeah.
And it's because of the understanding that we have about cults. You know, the Branch Davidians in Waco with David Koresh, that was definitely a cult. You know, these hardline fundamental Mormons, that's a cult. Mm-hmm. But what we were doing wasn't a cult. We were just following some rules that probably were a little bit ill-advised.
Yeah.
But, you know, the conversations that I have now, absolutely, she acknowledges that IBLP was a cult. My dad figured it out pretty quickly, I think. And, you know, everything that my parents say to me now is more so about how sorry they are for putting me and my siblings through this. And so there's a ton of acknowledgement there that feels very validating.
Yeah.
You know, having your parents understand, hey, we were doing the best that we could, but we messed up and we're sorry for that. And that just shows what good people my parents truly are, and that they were just, you know, misled through this whole experience. You know, as I'm sure you've talked about before, there's two types of people affiliated with cults. There's predators and there's prey. And my parents absolutely fell into that prey category.
Yeah. Oh, that got me all emotional talking about your parents. That's really sweet. I'm lucky in the same way that my parents left about a year after I did. And it was because of the research that I brought to them that I was like, explain this. And they couldn't. And they were like, oh man. And so I was lucky that they also left. And so I don't have to deal with anything within my immediate family. Extended family is another story, but we won't get into that. Okay. So when you left, you are being dropped into this world that you have zero experience with. Your entire childhood was very isolated, and even your teenage years. So now that you're 18, what's going on? Like, how do you navigate the world?
I don't know, honestly, how people leave a cult and then have normal lives after the fact.
It's tricky.
I don't know how people do that in a healthy way, because I certainly did not. When I got out of the cult at 18, it's like you said, it's culture shock.
Yeah.
You get dropped into this world that you've been isolated from your entire life.
Yeah.
And you're trying to figure out how am I going to be a normal functioning member of society now? Because all of the people that, you know, parents were trying to protect their kids from in this cult, you're now exposed to. All the ideas, all the activities, all the mentalities, they're right there in your face, and it's brand new. Mm-hmm. And some of it's really exciting. You know, oh, I can go to rock concerts now. This is cool. I can go hang out with my friends alone now. This is fun. I can date women now. Wow. How exciting. But at the same time, I wasn't prepared for that at all. I didn't really know how to interact with normal people. I only knew how to interact with other cult members, other homeschoolers, other very conservative religious individuals, right?
Yeah.
And so here I am thrown into this world, and I'd already started drinking at that point. But when I made the full separation from the cult, that's really when I started drinking to an extensive amount. And for me, it was a way to cope. It was a way to cope with some of the trauma that I had been through in IBLP. It was a way for me to cope entering this new world And it gave me the false sense of security and courage to be able to interact with people who didn't know anything about how I had grown up and didn't relate to it at all.
Yeah.
And so when I was drunk, I didn't have a problem, having conversations, being the funny guy, being entertaining, it was easy. And so that became kind of a crutch for me to deal with real life.
Yeah. I imagine that it must have been really socially hard to insert yourself into conversations, especially with a lack of pop culture references and just feeling kind of othered.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about how I miss a lot of pop culture references, and I wasn't sheltered nearly to the extent that you were, but certain movies, like we couldn't watch rated R movies and couldn't listen to certain music. And so even now, I just feel so uncomfortable anytime someone brings up like, do you know this band? Or they just bring up a band as if I already know who they are. And I'm like, yeah.
Sure, why not?
Those guys.
Absolutely.
Oh, they're girls. I mean, those girls. I'm just a little confused. And now that I'm married to a DJ, he's kind of like, okay, babe, it's time to expose you to certain things. And I'm just like,
oh, you're getting an education now.
Yeah.
How exciting for you.
Yeah.
That's great stuff.
He's pretty excited. We did a whole episode about it, like my fiance's issues with my Mormon past. And he's like, I could be upset about it, but honestly, I think it's more exciting than anything because I get to be the one to show you all the things. I'm like, yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
That's actually really cool for him.
Yeah.
He gets to open your eyes to this whole new world. Yeah, and I mean, it was that aspect, the pop culture references. You're absolutely right, but also being homeschooled. I mean, I didn't play sports. I wasn't on the football team. I didn't know what detention or getting suspended was. I didn't know anything about a normal childhood, and so it went beyond the pop culture references, and it was just the whole spectrum of having a human experience, a normal human experience.
Yeah.
And so relating to people for me was almost impossible at first. It was really, really tough. And I think that's why like you said, I relied on alcohol to feel comfortable in normal society.
Yeah, I'm sure. And what was that like when you kind of had that realization that this substance was your new best friend or your gateway to society? I'm sure it was really difficult. I'm trying to relate, but I can't because I've never drank alcohol. So I'm relying on your explanation of what it was like and what made you start to go down that spiral to kind of an overcorrection.
Yeah. So it was pretty quick for me. Once I felt the effects of alcohol and being drunk and how comfortable I felt and how things were just easier for me, interacting with other people, operating society, I figured, okay, well, if being drunk feels this good, I see people having really great experience with drugs as well. When I'm at a concert or I'm just hanging out at friends' houses, I see the people doing drugs having the most fun. And so if alcohol is this great, well, let's take it to the next level. And so that's when I started experimenting a lot with drugs. And that was, alcoholism is extraordinarily dangerous, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers know. And drug addiction is alcoholism at the speed of light. It just ruins your life very, very quickly, especially when you're doing the kind of drugs that I was. And I got buried in that world pretty quickly. My drug addiction and alcoholism spiraled out of control within, a matter of 3 or 4 years. For 3 or 4 years, I would say I was doing it on a more recreational basis. But, looking back, even after, the first few months of, drinking and abusing drugs, I was already in pretty deep, just doing unsafe amounts of, various substances. Mm-hmm. I don't want to specifically name them on your podcast because I'm worried it'll get you in trouble.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. So this, my addiction and alcoholism, spiraled out of control pretty quickly. And I got to a point where I didn't know how to stop anymore, and I was stuck in that cycle of addiction for 10 years.
Wow.
10 years. So I started, really heavily abusing alcohol and drugs when I was around 19. And that continued until I was 29. And life got really dark for me. It's so interesting, going from this trauma that you didn't choose, right? I never chose to be a part of a cult, and then moving into this trauma that I absolutely chose for myself. And I chose it because it was the only way that I knew of how to deal with, some of the trauma that I had from being in that cult. It was, for me, an easy way out. I could bury a lot of the feelings. I could hide a lot of the memories with drugs and alcohol. Not to mention, it gave me this new experience interacting with other people and being a normal person, or what I thought was a normal person. Not a normal person doesn't drink, constantly and abuse drugs nonstop. But for me, it felt normal because I was able to have these relationships now with what I considered normal people.
Yeah. The thing that's really hard about these high control groups is they don't really give you a healthy baseline. They just tell you one extreme is the only way to go and then demonize everybody else. So you really don't even know what your options are. And that's one of the things that's so harmful, is they put so much fear in you so that when you leave, you just have no education about anything. Because I'm sure if you would have had any idea of what would have been able to happen to you or what could have happened to you going down that path, you probably would have steered a different direction. And also, if you were given resources like therapy, or maybe meditation works for you, or whatever it is, or even if it was just cannabis, I feel like it's so hard when they just create this black and white thinking and you don't really know that you have options. So I know that you say that you chose it. And also, I feel like you didn't have much of a choice because you just weren't given the resources to understand how to cope with all of this trauma that you just walked away from, or you're trying to run away from.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was the only choice that I had. I thought my two choices were, well, I just live with this trauma. I live with being uncomfortable and awkward all the time. I live with not feeling comfortable in my own skin, or I abuse drugs and alcohol and I get to avoid all those feelings, and I don't have to think about the memories that I have, and I get to feel like a normal functioning member of society.
Yeah.
And I thought those were the options. So you're exactly right. I do know people though that, got out of the IBLP cult and they managed to find the resources that they needed. They managed to move on in a much, much more healthy way. I think, quite honestly, for me, this was just the path I was destined to go down. And I am grateful actually for how I got out of the cult and the life that I had afterwards, because it's allowed me to have a very unique perspective on how to help other people that are battling some of these same demons.
And one of those resources, while we're speaking of resources for those who are listening and maybe need some help to get out of a high demand group, or specifically IBLP, you are working with Recovering Grace. And I just want to plug that you have a show coming up in July in Austin, and some of those proceeds are going towards that resource, right?
Yeah. Recovering Grace, absolutely phenomenal organization. They are, I think, deserve a large part of the credit for ultimately taking down Bill Gothard and crippling the IBLP organization, just by providing a forum for victims of this cult to come and share their stories and find support in a community of people that had been through, some of these similar experiences.
Yes, and it's so important.
It's absolutely crucial to be able to find people that you can identify with, because we all thought we were just alone in these experiences.
Yeah. We
thought there's no one else out there that has been through the same stuff. We are completely isolated, right? And then all of a sudden, Recovering Grace pops up, and you find out that, oh wow, there's a lot of people out here who have experienced this. It was that was the first time I heard other stories of guys that had been through Life Focus like myself, and they shared their experiences on this program and how it created trauma for them. And so yeah, we're gonna be doing a live show in Austin, Texas on July 26th, and all of the ticket sales from that live show will go to Recovering Grace to help them continue.
All of the ticket sales. That's amazing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have several guests. Dr. John Cornish, who founded or co-founded, he likes to say, the website, he'll be there. Some of the folks that were in the Shiny Happy People documentary, they'll be there to just, talk about their experiences and answer questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that'll be a fun time.
That's so awesome. One of my guests, Emily, who was on the documentary, same thing. She found Recovering Grace website and for the first time saw her experience in another woman and realized, oh, I guess that was wrong. Because sometimes it really just takes someone to hold up a mirror with their own perspectives and their own story to realize how similar you are, and to realize, to put words to what you went through and how it was abuse. And I'm seeing that even in the comments of my YouTube channel, people are going, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize what I went through was abuse until someone said it out loud. Thank you for sharing your story. And that's why it's so important to shed the light on these dark, scary places of these cults so that people can understand this was your reality, but it wasn't the norm. It wasn't what
That's
you
right.
should have been experiencing, because it does take a lot of active deprogramming to actually understand that something that you went through may not have been the way it should have been, because that's all that you knew. And how would you know any different?
What's really interesting is Recovering Grace was founded in 2011. I was first exposed to it in 2012. And at that point, I was at the worst of my addiction. My life was an absolute disaster. Things were, it had gone beyond spiraling out of control. I was at that point probably, definitely at rock bottom. Just unable to function, couldn't get sober, wanted to get sober, couldn't get sober, tried multiple times, went to therapists, just, trying to find a way out of this addiction. And what's interesting is my addiction started in New England. And about, I want to say 3 or maybe 4 years into my addiction, I decided I got to get out of here. The problem, in my opinion, at that point was it's the people I'm around. All of my friends are, alcoholics and drug addicts. If I get away from these people, I'll be okay. So I came back to Texas at that point, which is just such an interesting juxtaposition, right? Because my parents moved me away from Texas to New England because they thought the problem was the people I was around in Texas. Well, I experienced a much more extreme issue up in New England, but tried the exact same escape tactic that my parents had tried years before. So I ended up back in Texas. And quickly discovered that the problem was not the people that I was around. The problem was me. So I continued to spiral out of control. And then I discovered a friend showed me Recovering Grace in 2012. And this is actually my buddy Bryce, who's the co-host on the podcast that I do, on Surviving the Shiny Happy People Cult. And he shows me this Recovering Grace website, and immediately I'm just shocked by the relatability, how it resonated with me, how other people were going through similar challenges, right? And there was even stories about how people, after they got out of the cult, had ended up, turning to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. And so I was exposed to that in 2012. 2013 was actually when I got sober. So I've talked with Dr. Cornish about this. It wasn't Recovering Grace that got me sober, but I think it was an important piece of my sobriety journey where I was able to recognize, oh, other people have been through this too.
Yeah.
If I'm not alone, then maybe there's a way out.
Yeah.
Maybe I do have hope. And I'm not going to be stuck in this cycle of addiction for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
so I ended up getting sober in 2013 after my fiance at the time had gone to rehab and had her own extraordinarily difficult journey with addiction as well. So, I got sober in April of 2013, and here we are over 10 years later. And the life that I have today is just amazing. I could not have dreamed that my life would be so spectacular today.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I'm so happy for you. Congratulations on 10 years sobriety. That's amazing. And I have to know if you ever reconnected with your girlfriend from high school.
So, yes.
You did.
I did. Yeah. So when I was about 19, found her contact information, reached out to her, and it was an absolute shock when we spoke. I remember calling her on the phone. When she heard my voice, she literally screamed out loud, was absolutely shocked that I was even still alive.
Aww.
And so we talked for a little bit, and she told me about the letters that she had written to me, and I told her I never got them.
Yeah.
I was isolated. I was locked away from the outside world. And so we were able to catch up a little bit. And it turns out that she actually went through some pretty difficult experiences as well. After my family left Texas and moved up to New England, she was actually abused by a church authority figure.
Oh.
After the fact. And that was really tough to hear, especially with the guilt complex that I already had, because immediately I blamed myself.
Yeah.
If this hadn't happened, she wouldn't have had to go through that with a church leader. And so, it was a bittersweet moment, reconnecting with her. She's, doing great now. I haven't talked to her since then. Because that conversation really gave us both the closure that we needed, I think.
Yeah. Wow. That's great that you reconnected. And I didn't mean to pull focus from your happy ending. So we can go back
absolutely.
to that. But I just had to know. So how are you doing now? You're a comedian, you do shows. I assume that you're married. Like, what's your life look like now? How are you doing, Davey?
Well, number one, I am not married.
Oh, no.
Never been married.
Oh, no. I just shoved my foot in my mouth.
That's so funny, because the last thing I had talked about was my fiance at the time, right? That didn't work out.
Okay.
That, unfortunately, or actually, fortunately, that did not work
Okay.
out. But no, life today is amazing. I could not have dreamed, back then when I was trying to get sober, dealing with so much of the trauma from, what I'd been through with IBLP, I could not have dreamed that my life would be as amazing as it is today. It was absolutely a journey, not just unwinding from the cult, but also unwinding from years of drug addiction after the cult.
Yeah.
So when I got sober, I was 29 years old. And I had been abusing hard drugs and alcohol for years. When I got sober, I decided, that I was going to do it on my own. My fiance at the time had gone to rehab. She subsequently got kicked out of rehab because she brought drugs into the facility with her. And so I decided, well, if rehab didn't help her, and I've already been to the Colts version of rehab, I'm not going to go again. I'm going to do this on my own. And so I had a very difficult detox journey. Had a seizure initially, and there was no one there to help because I was doing it on my own on my sofa in my house at the time. But I ultimately detoxed from all the chemicals that were in my body. It was a rough 3 months initially, but I found another program that actually helped me out a lot, and I owe them a debt of gratitude for getting me through, the first part of my sobriety journey. I went through that program and, really just never looked back. I made a decision when I got sober. If I'm not happy if I don't have a fulfilling life sober, I'll just go back to the alcohol and drugs. What do I have to lose at this point? But, once I got through, the first 3 months or so, I realized how amazing my life already was and how many things were changing rapidly for me. One of the craziest experiences I had early on in recovery, I was at a restaurant and my ex-fiance's mom happened to be at that same restaurant, and she was walking out as I was walking in, and I see her and we make eye contact and she doesn't acknowledge me at all. And I thought, oh, she's probably just mad at me because, her daughter's still, struggling with substance abuse. But I went ahead and said hi to her, and she looked at me, and I saw that she didn't recognize who I was at all. So she's making eye contact with me, just confused. And I had to tell her, it's me, it's Davey. And she was like, oh my God, I didn't even recognize you. What's changed? And it really was just 3 months worth of sobriety had completely changed the way that I looked, the energy that I was projecting, to the point that this lady who'd known me for 2 years didn't even recognize me. Now, after 10 years of recovery and, healing and helping other people through, some similar challenges that I experienced, in my addiction and in my childhood, the life that I have now is just, it's a beautiful thing. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude on a regular basis. I went through, I've definitely been through some dark times during my sobriety, but at this point in my life, I've made the conscious decision. About 3 years ago, I made a conscious decision. I'm going to only make decisions that I feel like will contribute to living a pleasant life.
Yes.
And that's where I'm at now. And that's why I do stand-up comedy, and I love podcasting, and I love having interactions like you and I are having right now, because this is what adds to my life and brings joy, and makes my life pleasant. I was involved in corporate America for a long, long time, and was actually pretty successful in that life as well. And then woke up one morning and realized this doesn't resonate with me anymore. And I don't care about being wealthy, and, successful by other people's standards. I just want to be happy. And so that's when I, kind of decided to redirect. Some people would call it a midlife crisis.
No.
Because this was about 4 years ago. But yeah, took a step back from corporate life, started doing stand-up comedy and podcasting, and, I'd done content creation and, comedy adjacent sketches for, a lot of years prior to that, but decided to go all in on it. And it's just been, it's been the coolest thing.
Wow.
And, I've gotten to meet some incredibly interesting people along the way. And what's so funny is, I have a lot of friends in the comedy community that know about my life growing up in a cult, and know about the years that I struggled with drug addiction. And they've all told me, you've got to talk about this cult stuff.
Yeah.
And I never really had, because it was still so personal and sometimes a little bit raw. And so this documentary coming out, the Shiny Happy People documentary, that, like you said, is the #1 documentary series debut for Prime Video ever.
Wow.
When that thing came out and I watched it, I immediately told my producer that produces my podcast, hey man, we got to do a series on this thing. I think I'm finally ready to talk about this stuff. And just the way that it's helped other people, the way that it has resonated with, former members of IBLP, people who grew up in this strict, fundamental Christian environment, has been the most gratifying aspect of it, for sure. So it's been pretty amazing.
That is pretty amazing. It's awesome. It's all the best descriptive words. No, really. I'm just so proud of you for being brave enough to come forward and talk about it, because I know it's not easy. And I know that even when you leave it behind years later, there's still this shame that kind of creeps in every now and then. And you kind of think, how did I fall for that? Or how did I not leave sooner? Or whatever it is, our brain plays so many tricks on us and makes us feel ways in which we really shouldn't. And so telling your story is really awesome, and I love that you're incorporating it into your comedy, because not only is sharing your story very relatable, so many people can relate to this type of trauma, like you said, not just from IBLP, but other fundamentalism religions, and then you add that comedic relief to help people be able to laugh about it, because it's so hard when you have to talk about it. So being able to add that levity really just gives people permission to see themselves in a different light, to laugh about something that's traumatic, to maybe even realize that they were going through something that they didn't realize before. So I just commend you for going on that journey. And what a beautiful story of ups, downs, roller coaster, and you just found your way right where you're supposed to be. It's just really inspiring. So congratulations, Davey. You did it.
Thank you, Shelise. I often say my life is just a dark comedy, essentially, or it has been a dark comedy, and we're finally getting to the good, inspiring part, right? And it's interesting, I'm actually going to be releasing a 20-minute stand-up special as well after we do the live event in Austin. We're going to be doing a 20-minute stand-up special that essentially covers what life was like in this cult.
Oh my gosh.
So centered around IBLP, but in a stand-up comedy format. So it'll be interesting.
Davey, I cannot wait for that. You have to send it to me once it's available. We'll post it on our community page so everyone can go check it out.
Absolutely.
And before we wrap this up, I need your Linda listen moment. Sassy statement is the viral video with the toddler goes. Something you want to say to someone who's pissed you off, or inspiration.
I love that you do this, and I think for me, the Linda listen, your past, your trauma does not define you.
Yes.
It is absolutely an aspect of who you are, what you've been through, but it doesn't determine the outcome for anyone. I should be homeless, in jail, or dead. The fact that I have the life that I have now, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I'm just so incredibly grateful. I had a moment last night, hanging out with my families and my nephews, and my 3 little nephews are giving us a concert. Singing VeggieTales songs to us, and realizing just how incredibly grateful I am for the life that I have. I just cannot, if you're watching this and you think that there's no hope, there absolutely is.
Yeah.
And the opportunity that I have today to get to work with people and help them, because they've battled some of the same demons, they've been through some of the same trauma. It's just the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, it really is. Thank you so much for sharing that. It means a lot that you're willing to come on and talk so deeply about your story, and even getting emotional. That's beautiful. It's so beautiful, because it gives people permission to do the same. It's hard to get vulnerable, especially when this is going to be broadcast to everybody. But when other people can see your story and see what you've been through and see your vulnerabilities, I think it really makes a difference and allows them to do the same. So thank you for sharing your story. And guys, definitely go check out his channel, Davey Jax. I'll put all the links in the description below. You can follow him on Instagram, Davey Jax with 2 X's, right?
Yeah, on Instagram, it's Davey Jax with 1 X. On YouTube, it's Davey Jax with 2 X's.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. We'll link all that below. And do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just thank you so much, Shelise, for letting me tell this story. I'm incredibly happy that some of my fans reached out and said, you got to get in touch with this girl Shelise and Cults to Consciousness, because the stuff that she's saying is the exact same as some of the stuff you're saying, and so I'm incredibly glad that we were able to have this moment.
Yeah, me too. And that's a testament to all of you guys watching. If you guys have suggestions, always hit me up either in the comments or over on Instagram. I see more Instagram DMs than I do see the comments, but definitely leave a comment anyway. Any words of encouragement you want to leave for Davey here, any support you want to give, and it helps the algorithm. If you want to hit that subscribe button, like and subscribe. I have to say it. And if you want to join Patreon, that would be awesome too. I have to thank my newest patrons, Holly and Claire. Thank you so much for joining us over there. We're really trying to build a community where you guys can talk about the show and talk about your own experiences. It's not a cult, I promise. And if you liked this episode, definitely check out the ones I'm going to link here. They're in the similar vein, and you will definitely want to check them out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.